The night was eerily silent, the kind of silence that hangs heavy in the air, thick with unspoken dread. Elena's footsteps echoed on the cobblestone streets as she hurried home, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced over her shoulder, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. Every shadow seemed to grow, every whisper of the wind sounded like a threat. She knew what she had done, knew that some secrets could never be buried. Yet, she never imagined that her betrayal would awaken something far more sinister. Just a few days ago, everything was normal. Elena, a young woman in her early 30s, had lived in the small, picturesque town of Crestwood her entire life. Everyone knew everyone, and gossip was the town's favorite pastime. But beneath the veneer of friendliness and camaraderie, dark secrets simmered, waiting for the perfect moment to boil over. Elena had always been a reserved person, careful to keep her distance from the town's scandals. But when she met Victor, a mysterious stranger who moved into the old, abandoned house on the outskirts of town, her life took a dangerous turn. Victor was charming, handsome, and dangerous. Everything Elena had secretly yearned for. He was a man of many secrets, and perhaps it was his enigmatic nature that drew her in. Their affair was intense and intoxicating, filled with passion and stolen moments. But it was also built on lies. Victor was married, and his wife, Claudia, was a woman not to be trifled with. Elena knew she was playing with fire, but the thrill was too addictive to resist. One night, after a particularly heated argument with Victor, Elena made a decision that would change everything. Consumed by jealousy and anger, she sent an anonymous letter to Claudia, revealing the affair in vivid detail. She hoped that by driving a wedge between Victor and his wife, she could have him all to herself. But she underestimated Claudia's resolve. Claudia was no ordinary woman. She came from a long line of witches, a lineage that thrived on the dark arts. When she received the letter, she didn't confront Victor or Elena. Instead, she performed a ritual, summoning a vengeful spirit from the depths of the underworld to exact her revenge. The next morning, Elena found Victor's lifeless body in the old house, his face twisted in terror. His eyes were wide open, staring into nothingness, as if he had seen something beyond human comprehension in his final moments. Panic-stricken, Elena fled the scene, but the horrors were just beginning. That night, as Elena lay in bed, trying to drown her guilt in sleep, she was awakened by a chilling presence in her room. The air grew cold, and a sense of dread filled her heart. She could feel someone or something watching her. She turned over slowly, her breath catching in her throat as she saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was Victor, or at least what was left of him. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and his mouth twisted into a sinister smile. He moved closer, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he was savoring the fear emanating from Elena. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her body was frozen in terror. Elena, Victor's voice was a mere whisper, but it echoed in the silence of the room. Why did you betray me? Tears streamed down Elena's face as she tried to speak, to explain, to beg for forgiveness. But the words stuck in her throat. Victor's ghostly hand reached out, brushing against her cheek, leaving a trail of ice in its wake. You thought you could escape, he said, his voice filled with bitterness. But betrayal has its price, and now you will pay. Elena felt a searing pain in her chest, as if her heart was being ripped apart from the inside. She clutched at her chest, gasping for breath, but the pain only intensified. Her vision blurred, and she could feel the life draining out of her body. Victor's laughter echoed in her ears as darkness consumed her. When she awoke, she was no longer in her bed. She was in the old house, the one where Victor had died. The room was dark, the only light coming from a single candle flickering in the corner. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Elena tried to move, but she was bound to the bed, her wrists and ankles tied with thick, rough ropes. Panic surged through her as she struggled against her restraints, but it was no use. The ropes only tightened, cutting into her skin. From the shadows, Claudia emerged, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. She was dressed in a flowing black gown, her hands clasped in front of her as she approached the bed. "You should have known better, Elena," Claudia said, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You cannot betray me and expect to walk away unscathed." Elena's heart raced as Claudia began to chant in a language she didn't understand. The room grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in on her. She could feel a dark force gathering, feeding off her fear and desperation. As Claudia's chanting grew louder, Elena's vision blurred, and she could see shadowy figures emerging from the walls, their faces twisted in agony. They were the spirits of those who had crossed Claudia in the past, trapped in an eternal cycle of torment. "You will join them, Elena," Claudia whispered, her eyes locked onto Elena's. "Your soul will be bound to this place, forever cursed, forever suffering." Elena screamed as the spirits descended upon her, their icy fingers clawing at her flesh, tearing her apart piece by piece. The pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the horror of knowing that this was her fate for all eternity. As the darkness consumed her, Elena's final thought was of Victor and the betrayal that had led her to this hellish end. The town of Crestwood never spoke of Elena again. Her disappearance was just another mystery added to the town's dark history. But those who ventured near the old house on the outskirts of town could still hear her screams, echoing through the night, a warning to all who dared to betray.